taking on this role, for which she is well qualified. In addition to all of her community work, which certainly extends beyond this neighbourhood, she has a degree in law, a PhD in biochemistry. She was a postdoctoral fellow in physiology and microbiology and teaches law and ethics at UBC. Jane?
Thank you, Susan, for getting through all our business and for all of you sitting patiently through the business of the DRA. The DRA is really a splendid organization, and we're very, very lucky as a community to have it and all the other organizations that keep working and rolling for us in the community. I'd like to invite the candidates to come forward if they can. I see most of them in the room. So there should be chairs here, and if you can find your seat behind your name. The format for tonight is that the audience, you should have between you, or at least share between you, some questions. The development of these questions was done by soliciting input on the Dunbar Residents Association listserv. If you haven't signed up for that, I would strongly recommend it. It is the most wonderful place to find a decent plumber, find out what's happening politically, find out the specials and everything else in our community. We are going to, so these were questions that were suggested. Other questions came forward to the board, from members of the community, and they reflect issues that we felt as a board would stimulate dialogue and help us understand some of the issues and personalities of the candidates. Once our candidates have settled, the format will be, I will ask them all to have a brief statement. We will run through the questions, and I will read the question and then ask one candidate from each party to respond to that question, and we'll go through that until all 5 questions have been completed. Then I will take written questions from the floor, and finally there is a mic for the open question period. We hope to get all this done by 9:20. Then there will be coffee and cookies and a chance to mingle with these candidates and other candidates who've said that they are coming just for that part of the meeting. Together here. The candidates will be kept on time by our very vigilant and visually attractive Dunbar patroller who has signs in front of her. So if you can't see what's happening and I seem to be looking or pointing, that's the method we're going to try and use. So we have with us tonight from my right, we have Tim Lewis from COPE, Ellen Woodsworth from COPE, Adrian Carr from the Green Party, Raymond Louis isn't with us yet, see him? Randy Helton from Neighbourhoods for Sustainable Vancouver, running for Mayor, Elizabeth Murphy running for the councillor position from Neighbourhoods for Sustainable Vancouver, Councillor Anton is not with us yet, and Ken Charco, who's representing the NPA in the candidacy for council. So I'd like to start by inviting each of the candidates that's with us to introduce themselves and give a one minute presentation. So maybe, Tim, can you start?
Good evening, and wow, what a great turnout. We've been on the campaign trail now for 6 weeks, and I got to tell you, the Dunbar Residents Association has the best turnout by far. I'm running for City Council because I want to get things done. Get things done by working with people from all points on the political spectrum. I have a 30-year history of doing that. 30 years ago, I founded the Hand-to-Door system, working with people from many different points on the political spectrum. On the park board for 6 years, working with my friends in another party, the NPA, to cut perks to park commissioners and to bring in North America's most restrictive policy on whales in captivity. On council for 6 years, working with Raymond Louie to bring in Canada's first ever ethical purchasing policy, and working with Peter Ladner in the NPA to establish Vancouver's Food Policy Council. But enough about what I have done. I want to tell you very quickly what I want to do. I want to put neighborhoods in charge of their own neighborhood. And if Dunbar says they don't want laneway housing, then there's no laneway housing in Dunbar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Woodsworth?
Thank you very much. I've been working very hard for 3 years to strengthen neighborhoods. I think we have to look at the neighborhood system and make sure there are area plans in place that have teeth, and that's what we go by. I think we have area plans in place before we do spot rezoning so that we know what the community wants and we can assure 20% affordable housing, the community parks, the childcare, and other things that we need. We also need democratic reform. We need wards so that people have somebody who's accountable to them, so there'd be some from the ward and a few at large who would represent us at Metro. I've worked very hard to take the lead at fighting the casino at Northeast Falls Creek. I stood up against mixed martial arts. I've been fighting for civil liberties, and as a person who organized in the downtown east side, I've worked very hard to look at the needs of renters, people in the SROs, and to really campaign to make Vancouver a city for everyone. COPE is a 40-year-old party that has stood very clear in our positions. We've stood steady, and at council I've worked with the Dunbar Residents Association on a couple of projects that were coming in the development that they were saying was seniors, but was just a way for developers to build a very big development, a very expensive development, and a development that wasn't meeting the needs of the Dunbar area residents, and I stood up and voted against it. I look forward to working with the Dunbar residents as I work with the residents in Grandview, Woodlands, the downtown east side, Marpole, Norquay, and across the city to make this city have the kind of affordability it needs for the youth, the seniors, the immigrants, the young people, and to make sure there's transportation system. We've got to make sure that TransLinks comes back so it's in the hands of people who are elected. And we have to make sure that we work together to make sure that this is a city that everyone can continue to live in, not be driven out by market demands. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, and what a great turnout. My name is Adrienne Carr. I am known to you, I think, largely from the fact that I was involved in the Green Party. Helped found North America's first Green Party. But what you may not know about me is I was born in Vancouver. I have a master's degree in urban geography from UBC. I studied with Walter Hardwick and David Lay, and I did my master's thesis on the role of community groups in creating community spirit and stopping development that they didn't like in Kitsilano. I think those are the same issues that are facing us today in Vancouver. We're at a crossroads. I'm running for council because I love this city. And I believe that the challenge, the question we are facing now is how do we grow, or how do we accommodate some growth without compromising the neighborhoods and quality of life that we love. I believe I can help in that. I've got the skills to do so. On November 19th, I'll be your only Green on the ballot. The firefighters have recommended me. I'm very honored. I hope you recommend me. Put me first on the ballot. You still got 9 choices. Thank you.
Councillor Louie, you have 1 minute introduction.
Good evening, everyone. I am Raymond Louie, and I'm running for re-election with Vision Vancouver, Mayor Gregor Robertson in Vision Vancouver, and I'm pleased to see the number of people in the room tonight. I've met and worked with some of you in the room over the course of my 9 years on council, and I hope to have the opportunity to do that again. But I want to tell you a little bit about myself for those that don't know. I was born and raised in the city of Vancouver. My family owned a small business on Commercial Drive for 25 years. I have 3 children still in the school system, and I live on the east side of Vancouver. But I've come to your neighborhood often over my time as 9 years. And I have worked on a number of issues with Jane coming to council many times and corresponding with her lots. She's a fierce advocate for the neighborhood, but not just Jane, but many of you within the room as well. I hope that our message in terms of providing affordable housing, working on transportation issues, making sure our city is safe, and keeping our taxes low has resonated with all of you. I look forward to, after this little bit of conversation that we have at the front, to have some conversation with you afterwards as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Randy Helton.
Good evening. My name is Randy Helton. I'm running for the position of Mayor, City of Vancouver, with Neighborhoods for a Sustainable Vancouver. Our website is nsvancouver.ca, and we have 4 others running with us, that we're making a total of 5, and we've also recommended 6 others, even from other parties that we could work very well with. There's a silent crisis going on in Vancouver right now, and I can tell you from personal experience. I've been at City Hall many times. I'm from the West End, where we have found very problematic development and rezoning applications coming through. Citizens of Vancouver over the last several years have spent tens of thousands of hours fighting City Hall. This is very rarely covered adequately in the mainstream media. I would say that there's what looks like a crisis of, it looks like systemic corruption, and it's based on the problem of campaign financing. I know this because I've seen and felt what it's like to be in a community. There are communities in the east and west of the city who have a lot of problems with what's going on at City Hall. Neighborhoods for Sustainable Vancouver has some great ideas, lots of policies. We think we have the experience and the grassroots support that we can fix the city. Please vote for us and the people we recommend, and we would like to serve you, the people of Vancouver. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Elizabeth?
Thank you. Elizabeth Murphy, and I'm also running with Neighborhoods for Sustainable Vancouver. And I actually grew up in this neighborhood. I grew up at 37th and Dunbar, and I was born and raised in Vancouver, but this was my hood. And I now live in Point Grey. So many of the issues that have come up over the last 2 terms are why I'm running right now for council. First, the last term with the NPA, we thought that Vision was going to be true to their word and actually do things differently than the NPA, but we found that in fact many of the policies that the NPA have previously brought through, the Vision Vancouver have actually implemented. So we want to change that. We want to bring it back to the community level and have neighborhoods more involved in what happens in their neighborhood so that they can determine the scale and pace of development and growth over time. And also to ensure that we have the amenities and all of the infrastructure to deal with additional growth in a timely manner rather than as an afterthought. So one of the false impressions that is being perpetrated is that we, oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was going over so much. Anyways, thank you very much.
Councillor Anton, who is a star at 1 minute.
A minute does go fast. My name is Suzanne Anton, and I'm running for mayor with the Common Sense NPA team. I do live quite close to here, just down on Blenheim Street, and really got my start in politics through being the president of Carousdale Soccer Club and advocating for more kids on fields and better fields for the kids to play on. The NPA team is running on leadership, on taxes, keeping taxes low, and with the mantra, taxpayers first, always in our minds. We're running on a platform of housing supply, many people coming to Vancouver, so how do we build housing to accommodate those people and keep affordability okay in Vancouver, which is always challenging. And we're running on a platform of building a great city, building the streetcar, keeping our community facilities excellent and our cultural facilities excellent. We want to rebuild the relationship with neighbourhoods, which was broken during this last council. We will be supporting the neighbourhood committees, working closely with the neighbourhoods, because the neighbours always know best what works in their own communities. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I look forward to listening what you have to say. Appreciate Dunbar Residents Association always puts on one of the best attended all candidates meetings, and you've done it again, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much. My name is Ken Charco. Some of you may know me as the theatre guy at the Dunbar Theatre. I'm going to deviate a little bit from my traditional stump speech here. I've been asked a number of questions about the Dunbar Theatre, so I want to openly answer as many of them as I traditionally get in relation to that building. The Dunbar Theatre is, I think, and a lot of people have told me that, is a community treasure here. I worked with Peggy Schofield, you can see over there. She wrote the book on the Dunbar Theatre. When I say I wrote, she asked me a couple questions. It has the Dunbar Theatre in it. In relation to that, yes, Paul Martin used to own it. We used to work together. I approached him over 10 years ago while I was in school to run it for a summer project before the development was to occur. I ran it for a few months. I talked to the Martins, and they're very kind, and we worked out where I was able to keep it for a long period of time, and I've had it ever since. Now it's been sold. It's been sold to another company. It's a numbered company as far as I know. I've met the owners, and they're very good, and they've indicated that as long as I want to be there, that they have no plans to develop it. I have no plans to develop it. I want to keep the theatre there. I've recently invested, as an indication of that, a substantial amount of money, both in new chairs, new screen, new technology. The theatre revenue has improved every year since I've done that. It's one of the most profitable individual screens in the city. I plan to keep it there. Thank you very much. My name is Ken Charco.
Thank you for those introductions. Now we're going to move to the questions that the candidates have received some time ago. Just to remind you, if Councillor Anton has to leave, she does have a prior commitment. Unfortunately, Mayor Robinson couldn't be with us, although we did invite him over a month ago. Sandy Garacino, unfortunately, has decided to go down to the Biltmore rather than join the dialogue, the booze at the Biltmore rather than the dialogue in Dunbar. So the first question, so the way I'd like to run this, if I can, is to have each party choose one person to answer the question, so we're not here all night. And I'll read the capital plan question, and perhaps either Councillor Woodsworth or Tim Louis could start us off, and then run down the table. Sorry, Raymond Louis doesn't like me. Sorry, should I call you Raymond Lewis to balance it out? And then the next question, the laneway question, House question, we'll start with Adrian. I hope that works. So the first question, and most of you should have in front of you, is concerning the capital plan. The capital plan approved by this council will, if completed, spend 702 million in the next 3 years. Over half of this amount, 391 million, will be borrowed. The city intends to borrow 141 million under its existing borrowing authority, and then ask voters to approve the borrowing of an additional 1.8 million. The capital plan calls for a variety of improvements, including 39 million on parks and 79 million on community facilities. A closer examination reveals that of that 79 million, only 17 million will go to recreation facilities, and that no new community centres will be completed from these funds. There are then 4 questions. If elected, how do you intend to proceed for the additional provide for the additional community facilities needed as the city continues to increase its density and experiences additional demand for such facilities? How do you intend to ensure that the existing community centres are maintained and replaced in a timely manner? Would you support the replacement of more than one community centre in 2015 to 2017, or is Marpole the only one to be replaced in that period? Finally, will you vote to increase the city's debt load in 2014? If so, how much are you prepared to borrow? Those are the 4 questions on the capital plan, and I think Councillor Woodworth looks like she's going to start us off. Councillor Tim Lewis is going to start.
Well, those are 4 very, very great questions. As Chair of the Finance Committee for 3 years, I can assure you that we can do a lot better than one community centre every 3 years. You know, there are 22 community centres. one every 3 years, it'd be 66 years before they all get done. We'll all be done before they're done. The money's there, it simply needs to be allocated or reallocated in a wiser way, both in terms of capital and operating. Let me deal with operating first off. There is a lot of money spent in areas that I wouldn't necessarily spend it. With no disrespect to the current council, I wouldn't have spent or voted in favor of spending any money on any renovations at 12th and Cambie. That money should be put to work in the neighborhoods where it belongs. Number two, although I'm not wanting to leave the impression here that I'm anti-police, I think we've spent enough money on their capital plans, on very, very expensive programs, dispatch systems, and so on. We can be reallocating a very modest amount towards community center facilities, both capital and operating. In terms of operating, the budget that's the largest, I'm told that my time's up. So I'll leave it at that, but just to reconfirm, it's got to be more than one community center every 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian Carr.
That is a great question. First of all, let me start by saying that I and the Green Party, by my incumbent Park Commissioner Stuart McKinnon, feel very strongly that our community centres and our community services are the heart of our community, they are heart of our city, and that we absolutely need to speed up the renewal process. And in fact, not only that, but speed up the process for not just community centre renewal, but the parks and the recreation facilities, the libraries that go along with them. The question is, how do you do that? That is your question in here. How do you allocate money in the community plan? Well, one thing I understand is that community center associations have in some cases built up and leveraged some funds that they could have matched to city funds. I think that's a great way. If the community center has done that, I think that's a great way to think about moving forward more quickly on the renewal of a center. Secondly, you ask a question about debt. I don't believe that we should saddle our children or you as taxpayers with debt. And I do want to just give you one last point, which is I think we need to think about our taxes and what value we get for the taxes, and the fact that we need to have that trust that when we pay taxes, we get what we want in our neighborhoods, and that we shouldn't fight the notion of having to increase taxes if it's getting what we want. Thank you.
Councillor Louis.
So as the current chair of finance for the City of Vancouver, I can tell you that this capital plan went through an extensive process in order to determine how much borrowing that you as taxpayers should be saddled with. At $702 million, the intent is to not have your taxes rise beyond, essentially this capital plan is tax neutral for all of you. We could have borrowed more, and we went through consultation with the city, with all of you, invited everyone to come and give presentations on the capital plan. What we heard was that taxes should be kept low, especially given the tough economic circumstances now. Would I like to see more community centers and more investment into our community centers and libraries and other facilities like fire and our police facility that needs replacement? Yes. But it needs to be done in a context of keeping our taxes low and our ability to pay. Our AAA credit rating was downgraded as a result of significant pressure economically, and we cannot afford to go down in terms of our credit rating further because it increases our borrowing. So the short answer is yes, I would like to see more, but I want to do it in the context of fiscal responsibility as well.
Thank you.
60 seconds?
Seconds.
For 4 questions, okay? There are 4 sub-questions. So I'll be quick. I think Neighbours for Sustainable Vancouver will have a very different answer. A few points. One is that because of resistance from the previous councils under COPE Vision and the NPA, the development cost levies paid by developers have not kept up with inflation. Developers are not paying their fair share of the costs of increasing density. They should pay more. And perhaps because they're not paying enough, we're having our land prices escalate because they're getting better deals than they should be. Second thing is that if you look at the Vancouver Courier about 2 weeks ago, the front page, you'll see an article about Donna Liberon, who finally got a Freedom of Information inquiry answered with about 20 or 30% of the document still blacked out. But it shows that since 1998, successive councils dominated by COPE, Vision, and the NPA have failed to follow about 1,000 points that were identified by external consultants on how the city could improve its finances. From my review of this document, very briefly, I think that there are millions of dollars that could be saved, and that we should be able to save a lot of taxpayers' money and put more money into upgrade and repair of community centers. So the real answer is we don't know the full story. I don't think the city is releasing enough information about the financial status. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anton is rising.
Thank you very much. I, as I mentioned, came into politics through good community facilities, and it remains central to why I remain in politics. We need to have good community facilities. The community centres are underfunded. The cultural facilities are underfunded. The capital plan, which I did vote for somewhat reluctantly, but I voted for it, and I encourage you all to vote for it too. I say reluctantly because it did not reflect my priorities. My priorities would have been to fund at least one community centre in full. The partial funding for Marpole was not enough. We can fund the centres, and we can increase our community facilities by doing one thing, taking at least one thing away from what Vision is doing. They are pouring money into subsidizing rental housing. I do not support that. Money which comes from development needs to go into genuine public benefit, genuine public facilities. So that's the first thing I will do. The second thing I will do is make sure that in the next capital plan, it does have much more of a priority on community facilities, on facilities which you need for your families, which seniors need, which we all need to make our communities more livable. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now moving to the next question on laneway housing, and Adrian will start us off on this round. The question is as follows. In spite of environmental concern about single-unit housing, one of the first eco-density initiatives was to zone for another single-unit house on virtually every single-family residence lot in the city. Many homeowners adjacent to or across from these structures are upset, and others fear that there is no planning in place to deal with the increased demands on infrastructure or existing community facilities that come with zoning for 3 families on one lot. One in the main house, one in the suite, and one in the laneway house. Some builders of laneway houses have been testing novel legal instruments to allow those building and occupying the housing to have an ownership interest in the unit, supporting the observation by some that this is de facto subdivision. If elected, will you continue to support the uptake of this land use in its current form? Would you expand it to other areas? Would you increase the size of the footprint of these houses? And would you change anything about the current rules?
Great, thank you very much. It would be ridiculous to continue to support this program when there is so much disquiet and unhappiness in communities about it. The first thing is that it was brought in without community consultation. There wasn't buy-in from the communities about what laneway housing would mean in their communities. Secondly, I think we most had a notion that it meant some conversions of garages and some very small units in the backs of some lots, not universally applied across the single-family residential zones and to the height and density that is currently looking like it's expected. So, your second question was, would you expand it? No, it's not even working where it's in. Would you increase the size of the footprint? No, I think people are very upset about the story and a half that can go up to, and it's the shadowing that incurs, and the fact that it really does impinge on privacy in the backyards. Would you change anything? Of course. We have to consult with communities. We have to talk to people and make sure that they are happy in their community with the way in which any increased density takes place, and then stick to it. Don't do one-off negotiated deals.
Councillor Louis.
So the intention of laneway housing is to allow for our citizens across our city to live in the neighborhoods that they grew up in and grow old in, and provide our citizens more flexibility within their own present locations. Perhaps by adding a laneway house or moving into a neighborhood where they could grow old, expand their use by having their in-laws live in that laneway house, or using that laneway house as a revenue generator for themselves. This is an initiative that is not a new one for the city. It hasn't existed in a coach house for a period of time. But what I will say is that our density within our own houses have decreased over time. And in order to accommodate our children, our future generations, we must provide additional accommodations. Just to answer quickly, would I change this? We're undertaking a review of it. The expectation is that staff will report back to us early in the next year, and we'll have to look at those details at that time. And if necessary, to bring down the heights, to make the footprints more small, under the current conditions smaller, we would do that. But it's important, I think, for us to give this a chance and understand what all the impacts are before we make those changes.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Thank you. Elizabeth Murphy with Neighborhoods for Sustainable Vancouver. And laneway housing was actually brought in. They did do some so-called consultation, but unfortunately none of the feedback was actually incorporated into what was produced. And instead of doing a real pilot project, which is, they called it a pilot project, but at the same time they rezoned the entire city. All of the RS zones, which affects like 70,000 properties. So I think the answer is no, it should not continue as it is, that the input that was originally put forward should be reconsidered, and also all the ones that have been built should be evaluated to see what works and what doesn't work, and each neighborhood should decide how and what way they want to densify, and if they want to have laneway housing as part of that program, and what it should look like. The most important thing that they didn't incorporate was using laneway housing as an incentive to retain existing buildings, and I think that that's the most important thing if we want to keep the character of our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Ken Chaco.
Thank you. I'm just going to try to get right to the question so you know. In relation to if elected, would you continue to support the uptake of land in its current form? The answer is no, this needs to be reviewed. We need to take a look at community by community, almost neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block. We shouldn't have the same regulations here in Dunbar with smaller lot sizes, smaller laneways, and more of a rustic feel to it that we want in South Vancouver. I was over in South Vancouver, and the majority of them want more and larger laneway housing. Here, they want to have smaller and more control. We have to come away with more regulations that we can be able to get consultation in from the different neighborhoods that we have. Would you increase the size of the footprint of these houses? No. Would you change anything about the current rules? Yes. I would take it so that communities in themselves would have input in that, and if they don't want the laneway housing, they wouldn't have to take the laneway housing. Thank you very much.
You don't ask easy questions, do you? I think this is clearly an issue that's gotten the attention of everybody across the city. Young people are really enthusiastic about it. Builders are really enthusiastic about it. Designers, people who are getting jobs out of it are very enthusiastic. But we started to hear almost immediately that there were real concerns about a particular block, obviously in Point Grey, that was seeing 4 laneway houses built in that block. When I raised this issue and tried to get a moratorium so that we could review what was happening, I was defeated in council, unfortunately. Because clearly there are some real problems with this. There's the shadowing, there's the privacy issues, there's access to the lane, there's the question of hooking up to the sewage and various, the water that's needed. So there's a lot of really serious questions. It does provide more density, it does provide some rental, and it does provide some housing that people are calling for. So my concern is I thought we should put a hold on it right away, and instead what's happened is the staff are going away and they're waiting till we've built a little over, I think it's 100 units, and then they're going to be bringing back a review to council. I don't think that's good enough, but that's what's happening right now. I think there's really serious concerns. We have to review it and look at how it works and make sure that it works in a way that it works for the whole neighborhood and provides what the young people and seniors are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to question 3 concerning UBC development, and Councillor Louis, if you will start us off once I've read the question. The question is, UBC has for some time been aggressively developing the campus to include more residential units. It recently amended its community plan to provide for even greater density, planning for a total campus year-round population of 35,000, with additional residents during the term time. The recently released plan for the South Campus area calls for 15 towers of up to 22 stories on South Campus, of which 9 will define the westerly edge of Pacific Spirit Park. During the amendment process to the community plan, concerns were raised by the adjacent communities of Dunbar and West Point Grey, as well as by those living at UBC itself. Those concerns relate to the impact of the enormous increase in population at UBC and include traffic congestion, parking by staff and students who use the neighbourhoods as what are in effect park and ride areas, pressure on daycare, recreational facilities, schools, and the park, that's Spirit Park. The City of Vancouver nonetheless supported the amendments to the UBC's official community plan with little debate in council. In fact, I think it was 11 o'clock at night that it finally passed, with one speaker, myself. If elected, do you intend to continue to support without reservation the build-out on UBC lands? If elected, what position will you take with respect to the request of those living on campus for elected democratic representation? Councillor Lewis. Louis.
Jane. Well, first of all, let me start backwards. I believe that UBC's model of governance needs to change. I think that during my time on the UBC Joint Committee with Metro Vancouver that we expressed our concerns with them and continue to express concerns about elected representatives and the ability for the students to have better representation as well. But having said that, it is outside the jurisdiction of the City of Vancouver to tell them exactly. We could give comments. Densification out of UBC makes sense, but only if we get that transit line out to UBC as well. And we've been pushing, and Vision Vancouver, that as our #1 priority. We're not interested in creating a streetcar which will take away money that can build that transit line all the way out to UBC in order to provide them the services that they need to get in and out. And that's what our main priority is. In terms of the overall densification of the area, as long as they build the majority of that housing for students and for their faculty, and rather than moving it to a straight market system, I'm okay with that. I think that overall the region needs to spread out in terms of its densification, and we need to make sure that we all contribute a little bit of opportunity for housing people that are coming here, because we cannot stop them from coming. So, thank you, Sue.
Thank you. Brandy, you can ask this.
And I'm leaving, but I want you to know that I was here.
Thank you.
We have an offer of a ride for you, madam, if you'd like a ride.
Eleanor, yeah, she's with the Parks Board.
I think Susan's going to do it. Thank you. Why don't you carry on?
Thank you. Elizabeth Murphy with Neighborhoods for Sustainable Vancouver. And actually, I have been involved with this issue because I not only grew up in Dunbar, but I also live in Point Grey. And it is a huge problem with what they're doing out in UBC. I think that in fact the way that they try to claim that UBC is an example of sustainable development is actually just the opposite. I think that what they're producing out there is high density sprawl. Because what they've done is they're cutting down green space, putting up high density buildings, but it's going into green, and into the green zone of the park. And also at the same time, they're building high-end, mostly high-end condos that basically students and staff for the most part cannot afford to live in. And so then they have their students commuting from basement suites across the street, the city, and have to put in a $2 billion subway to get them to commute to their home. I mean, it's completely backwards. They should be providing student housing out there, and we should not be looking at that kind of density without the facilities to make it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe UBC should be part of the City of Vancouver, and I would like to see that happen. Now, of course, it's not up to the city to make that decision, so I'm just expressing a personal wish. It's up to the university and up to people at the university to decide what their fate should be. But I do agree that they've got to do something. You can't stay as unorganized territory forever. You need to somehow gain municipal status. Should they build more? I don't have an objection to building more per se, but you've got to have the community facilities and you've got to have the transportation. Using Dunbar as a park and ride and Point Grey as a park and ride is not good enough. We need to have the rapid transit going out, at least the Millennium Line, at least to Arbutus, and then possibly a streetcar or bus rapid transit up to UBC after that. When those conditions are met, public benefits, public facilities, transportation, and schools, then I think it's whether your building is 10 stories high or 12 or 15 stories high, I don't think makes too much difference. But you've got to have those pieces that go along with it. By the way, on the streetcar, we can do both. We can build the streetcar right now, which I'm planning once elected. The UBC line will follow in some years' time because we've got to do that Evergreen line first out in the Tri-Cities, then we get to the rapid transit in the City of Vancouver. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anton. Is Councillor Woodworth or Tim Lewis?
When universities rely on and begin to form a dependence on the profits that they make from development to fund the university, they've shifted from what they should be focused on, higher learning, into something they should not be focused on, and that is creating enormous negative impacts on the adjacent communities. So let's get something real clear, real quick. The UBC Board of Governors needs to get back to what they're supposed to be doing, running a university, not trying to play developer. Number two, they need to be requiring the developers out there to do what developers have always been required to do in Vancouver through community amenity contributions, CACs, provide the money necessary to build libraries, community centers, neighborhood houses, and so on. None of that is happening at UBC. So, in the 5 seconds I've got left, answer the first question, yes, I would be very strongly opposed to any further development there. And number two, they've got to have the ability to elect their own government there, their own government, so that that can be brought to a stop right away.
I don't know how many of you were involved in the fight to save UBC Farm, but I was, and I am, and so thank you for doing that, because something very precious in our city would have been lost to development of the plans originally as conceived without citizens like you standing up and saying, no, there are places that should not be developed that have greater value in their current form. High density sprawl, I love that line, Elizabeth. It's really true that somehow there's this mentality that if we just accommodate growth with big high-rises, that this is somehow greener. Well, it's not the case. My studying in social geography and urban geography at UBC was that there are limits to that growth. There are tipping points in density that absolutely detract to quality of life, and we have to take those into consideration and not overdevelop. I live in the West End. I know of which I speak. Third, regarding the development out there in the associated services, where has, in our livable city plan, where has gone this notion of complete neighborhoods? There are the shopping facilities and all the associated transit and community facilities needed to support that kind of density. We need to rethink where we are putting density in some modest form that is already in association with services that we have, and then upgrade those services to make sure that they can be supplied to people. And your final point, election. I don't know how many of you caught my press conference that I did with an Area A representative or candidate, Alexandria Mitchell, young woman, I'm quite impressed, who wanted to get an actual voting seat for Area A on TransLink board. Do you know that they have the second largest density of people traveling to and transit use and no direct elected representation? That's wrong.
Thank you. The fourth question concerns council hearings and public consultation, and Neighbourhoods for Sustainable Vancouver will start us off on this one. Rumours abound that the majority on this and previous council met before public hearings in order to decide the result before the hearing took place. The voting record would certainly substantiate those rumours. The result is that the public hearing process would seem to be a waste of citizens' time and effort. If elected, what would you do to restore faith in the public hearing process? And secondly, if elected, will you vote as a bloc with your fellow party members? Randy or Elizabeth? Elizabeth. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take the second question first. We would not vote as a bloc. Each member of NSV would be free to vote according to their conscience. That's in contrast to the most recent council. If you check www.vancouvercouncilvotes.wordpress.com, you'll see a database of about 50 critical neighborhood votes in which Vision Vancouver voted virtually as a bloc, and almost in every case against the dominant wishes of the community. And the first question is, what would we do to restore faith in the public hearing process? In contrast to the recent council's adoption of the regional growth strategy under Metro Vancouver and the STIR program and other programs and policies adopted with no or virtually no public consultation, we will make sure that there is good public consultation. And I would, as the mayor, I would like to reinforce to all the city staff, the public servants, that the Code of Conduct requires all public servants to first of all serve the public interest. And my question every morning to the staff would be, will every word and action that you do enhance the public trust? If not, don't do it. Thank you.
Ken Charco.
Oh, hello, thank you. I want to start off by just acknowledging some of my colleagues that are present today. We got Pacey Crawford running for Parks Board back there, and Bill McCurry, council candidate. Thank you. I wanted to acknowledge them. I also want to make it clear about the NPA. We're not a party, we're an association. So in answer to whether or not we'll be voting as a bloc, the answer is no. We will not. We'll have a great, in our caucus meetings right now, everyone disagrees all the time, and I'm sure on council you'll see a lot of votes where we do disagree. In relation to what would you do to restore the faith of the public hearing process is, again, we would listen to the community and individual votes, and we wouldn't be voting as a party, more as an association. All right, thank you very much.
Councillor Whitworth.
I think the first thing that we need to do to restore public confidence is we need to take developer money out of party politics. COPE does not take contributions from the corporations, and I don't think that any party should be doing that. I think we need a ward system so that people can run as independents, or if they want to run with a neighborhood association or whatever, but there should be transparency. And I chaired a cross-party committee that looked at electoral reform. Unfortunately, the provincial government decided to not include most of it. Secondly, I think that clearly Councillor David Cadden and I, both from COPE, did not vote the same way on many different issues. We thought about what the public was saying, considered it carefully, and made our own decisions of how we were voting. Thirdly, I think that the public really needs to have proper community consultations before we get to public hearings, not just where you go around looking at billboards, where there's a discussion like this with the community about the project so everyone's well informed before it comes to council. And I think that these are three minimal things that we could do to make sure that people restore or feel like the public process is a fair public process, because it's critical to democracy that you do come before council and that we listen clearly to what you say before we vote. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I absolutely believe that the public process, the way it's working, input process, the way it's working now, is not working. When people feel that their concerns are being disregarded, when the vast, vast majority of people coming out to a hearing, staying up sometimes till 2 in the morning to get through their speaking order, and they're almost unanimous, get ignored, it's not working. So the first thing that has to happen is a restoration of faith, trust, and involvement of citizens in a process where their wishes are being respected. And it's not, I have heard people in the current council say, oh, well, they're just a special interest group. They're everybody who came up from that community. No one else did. Those are the people you have to listen to. It's not some other group that didn't show up. Secondly, it's really critical that council sticks to the community plans where people have been involved and determined their wishes, and not do this one-off stir program like negotiations, which are bad public policy because they do not adhere to the community plan where community residents' issues are represented. Finally, on the last point, it's really critical that you know about me that I will put public interest first in every decision, and that I guess I will attempt to vote with myself. So if I'm one green on the ballot. But that I think that it's time to break down the partisanship. It's time to work on what are the best issues and try and reach some kind of agreement and improve those issues, dropping the partisan party labels.
Well, I can tell you that every vote that I vote on, I consider it on an individual basis, and I always vote my conscience on what I believe to be the best interests of our citizens, based on the best information that I have and based on the presentations that come before me. In order for us to remove that perception that there's bias and in terms of process or in terms of outcomes, I think it is important for us to remove the large influence from a number of influences. Developers is one, unions are another, and setting spending limits as well. We tried to do this last term. There was opposition, and it did not happen under the MPA. Councillor Anton did vote against that, and so we will continue to try to convince the provincial government, who refused our request this time at UBCM, to remove both developers, unions, and set limits on spending within the City of Vancouver. We do need to change the process that we do consultation. Clearly, it's not working as well as it should, and the intention is for us to do more planning prior to any development occurring. That's why we've implemented for the first time 3 planning areas in the City of Vancouver, and during that planning process, there will be no development except for exceptional circumstances. Like, for instance, if the provincial government says, let's build social housing and we've got a pile of money for you, those would be the exceptional circumstances. So my time is up, sorry.
Thank you. And our final question, question 5, and perhaps the MPA will start us off on this one. Suzanne will start us off, and I'll read the question first. New residents at 16th and Dunbar. The new 51-unit supportive housing project at 16th and Dunbar is ready for occupancy. An operational management plan for this unit was created with community input as a condition of the development permit. Recent remarks on the part of one councillor and the mayor have suggested that those terms may come under the direct control of council. And this was the comment that there were not enough people, homeless people, being directly placed into that unit. What is your position on honouring this community agreement, and what do you feel that such comments imply for the value of citizens giving time and effort to help ensure that such a project is a successful venture? Secondly, if elected, will you support council taking control of the placement of tenants in supportive housing units by council?
Thank you very much. I would like to, first of all, thank all the community members who have been so engaged in the committee to work with Coast Mental Health to make sure that the building at 16th and Dunbar fits in the community. And I know that your community, this community, is very active right now in welcoming the new residents of that building. So I just think that that is so wonderful for the new people coming, and I really thank everybody who's been involved in that, and I'm sure there's many people in this room who have been. The tenanting of the building is done under a joint committee. It is not a political process. It's done under the terms of the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed about 4 years ago now between the previous NPA Council and the provincial government and other entities. That Memorandum of Understanding continues, and I personally certainly will be living under the terms of that Memorandum of Understanding. It's not for politicians to interfere when these agreements are in place, and I think that the agreement was for a tenant mix that I think everybody thought would be a good one. There is an emphasis, and something I am most interested in, on people who live in this neighborhood being able to be in that building. And certainly there are homeless people in this neighborhood. The homeless who go into that building should be the homeless from this area, because people want to stay in their own neighborhoods. Whether they have homes or homeless, they do want to stay in their own neighborhoods. And so obviously that's very important. So thank you. I think all of us will look forward to seeing the building opening, and quite interesting to see how it develops. We do need social housing all around the city, and this is a real model for how that can be done. Thank you very much.
Councillor Woodworth or Tim Lewis?
Well, I just want to echo some of the comments you've already heard from others. We all have family members that have mental illness. There isn't a family in Vancouver that doesn't have one member at some level or another with a mental illness. One of the very sad facts of life is that many, many homeless people are in fact mentally ill. The downsizing of Riverview was done in a terrible way, and a lot of people that were accommodated are living on our streets. One of the ways to address that is to create facilities for people with mental illnesses. Now, I will tell you, I cannot understand, if it's true, I cannot understand why the mayor or anybody else on council would be suggesting that council take control of this facility. There may be something I'm unaware of. If there's an operational management plan at OMB that the community developed with all of the stakeholders, I'm absolutely committed to maintaining that OMB. If I've understood correctly, the community invested hundreds of hours developing that plan, and that plan should be honored. I'd be very, very receptive to any feedback from anybody here on that, but that's my take on it, not knowing all the background and all of the detail. Let's build more social housing for people with mental illnesses, but let's do it in partnership with our neighborhoods and our communities.
Thank you.
Absolutely honor the commitment that was made to the community here, and honor the involvement of people in the process to have such a housing development project in your community, because I think it is having those projects throughout the city that creates stronger community in the end. So no interference from City Council on this. This went through a process, my understanding. I would want to read more if it came up again at the council table to be thoroughly informed, but went through a process. There was an agreement. There is an MOU. It is not for council to interfere in that. This is a professional decision. As an aside, I just want to let you know that I, like Tim, I'm totally aware that there's not a family untouched, including my own, by mental illness. And I do volunteer fundraise for Stand Up for Mental Health. I think it's an issue that needs to be openly and warmly discussed by community. And that I think that professionals would say that it is not a Housing should not just accommodate people with one set of challenges. The mixture is what's really important for those people to help each other and the community to help and to fit with the community as well. So it's what's best for them and what's best for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Louis.
So thank you for the question. I've had a bit of benefit of communications with Jane on this as well, and I was hoping to get a bit of more information of where this comment is derived at, because we recently spoke of this issue in council, and unanimously we approved of the continuing tenanting process that is already in place. The committee has the job to do, and we intend to honor that, but there's no indication from council at all of interfering with that process, given that it's as Councillor Anton was saying, it's not a political issue. It's not the intent of council to interfere with the work that has already been done by the committee and subscribed to by all of council and directed as part of the MOU. So this is an important issue for us across our city, and we need to make sure that the needs of our citizens are addressed, and it needs to be respectful to each of the neighborhoods as well.
Thank you. Elizabeth Murphy.
Thank you. So yes, again, I also echo the fact that if there is a memorandum of understanding and an agreement between the community and the city and the provider, that should be honored. And it's not for the city to be messing in that. If there were some issues that come up as the building is occupied and as things go down the road, and if the community comes forward with some issues that weren't anticipated and that we need to discuss, then we have to address those things. But for council to, before they've even occupied the buildings and before it's even up and going, to be already circumventing a memorandum of understanding, I think that is wrong and fundamentally should not take place. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for helping us with those difficult questions. And we now move to the next phase of this, which is that as you've been coming in, some of you have been writing questions on cards, which we've collected, and these questions have been directed to specific councillors or for me to assign to a councillor. We will go through these, and when time allows, then we'll move to an open mic question period. So the first question I have for Councillor Louis is the following. The Vancouver hiking and biking public is still waiting for the Fraser River Trail in front of Marine Drive Golf Course to be built, and at last connected up to the walkways in Marpol's Fraser River Park and the new bus barn trail. What will be your immediate plans to complete this riverfront section of Vancouver's much-loved walking trail? And again, a 1 minute time. Thank you.
1 minute. Well, it is, in fact, a platform of Vision Vancouver to increase the hiking and walking trails and to make our waterfront more accessible. And this is a priority for Vision Vancouver to make that happen. It is held up by a privately held piece of land, and we intend to continue to put pressure on that landowner in order to open up that section for the enjoyment and use of all of our citizens. But it is, it will come down to us making some funding perhaps, or leveraging them in order to make it happen. But we intend to provide that pressure in an ongoing way and improve the rest of our green space in our city as well.
Thank you. The next question is for Councillor Woodsworth. Some years ago, the zoning regulations changed to encourage better design in keeping with the character of the neighbouring homes. There was a bonus for building using this design choice. Today, we see developers using this bonusing to build homes that maximise the housing size or reducing the yard to its barest minimum. This would seem to counter the effects to green Vancouver. Would you be prepared to review and amend the allowable FSR to make these conditions conditional rather than outright?
Well, I think this council obviously has been very, very committed to the green agenda and to making Vancouver the greenest city in the world by 2020, and we are #2 in North America right now. And it seems to me any way that we can learn from the citizens and learn from ideas around the world, such as ideas like this. We should consider them and implement them, because we are in a very difficult situation. I think that the fact is that the young people are down at Occupy. We're raising environmental concerns as number one concern, and unfortunately it's disintegrated into a discussion about the tents, when I think that we're known for a city that wants to tackle this one, and I appreciate the idea coming forward, and I would appreciate whoever gave the question in if they'd email me the specifics so that I could start working on it right away. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question was directed to Councillor Anton, so I think, Ken, you get it. The question is, do you believe that the wireless smart meter program should be stopped based on recent moratorium requests and an independent inquiry with full public hearings? If not, why not?
I want to make sure there's possibly two that it's the wireless smart meters in relation to BC Hydro. That is privately funded through BC Hydro, and that for which as a city councillor I don't have too much say in. But as it relates to the water meter programming, is that we are opposed to the water meter programming, which I think it might be referring to. We find the MPA's position that to spend $25 million would be much better spent on water conservation and upgrading of our water system than having water meters inside the houses. All right, thank you very much.
The next question is for Adrian Carr. Would you promote greater use of biomass energy technologies to create revenues for schools and parks?
I think that we really do need to create energies which are alternative, green, and low polluting, which is of course inherent in the word green. The use of biomass energies does, to some degree, relate to burning an incinerator. It's not waste, but it is biomass fuel. It's controversial. I have actually seen a biomass plant up in Prince George at the University of Prince George that had extraordinarily low emissions, and I think it's worth exploring. I think you've got to have public hearings on it. We need to fast track in the goal towards zero waste, the handling of food scraps, although it's being done and implemented in the single family zones. It's not in the apartment buildings, and it absolutely needs to be. It's a huge problem in terms of waste management. So I would not support incineration of waste stream, but I think it's worth looking into biomass energy.
Thank you. This is a question for Randy Helton. We talk about greener city and sustainability. I observe that when livable old homes in my neighbourhood are redeveloped, they are first turned into a pile of rubble. What would you do to ensure that valuable construction materials are recaptured and recycled rather than carted off to the dump?
Thank you. Well, I believe Metro Vancouver seems to be doing some work on that. They've been discussing ways to recycle metal, wood, and other materials in buildings. So I think, in principle, I would be very strongly supportive of any effort to recycle building materials if a demolition has to happen. And it requires cooperation with other governments in the region and Metro Vancouver. But the recent government, the current council, just approved giving permission to demolish buildings before development applications are approved. And we would actually like to see that reversed so that buildings cannot be demolished until a development application is approved. This would allow more opportunity to review the heritage protection and other ways to use existing buildings. In many ways, buildings that are still standing are more environmentally friendly than destroying them and rebuilding. Thank you.
The next question is for Tim Lewis. Why is it taking so long to modify elevators at SkyTrain stations? It's taken 3 months to modify it at Burrard and 6 months in other places.
give you a very short answer. I don't know. I'll give you this commitment a bit closer. If I'm elected, I'll get on it right away and find out why it's taking so long. I do know this. TransLink is not accountable. And the reason TransLink is not accountable is because this board is not elected. And one of my #1 commitments, if I'm elected to City Council, is to democratize TransLink. Once we've democratized TransLink, elevators will be such a quick item to solve that you'll have forgotten about it in the blink of an eye, and we'll deal with all of TransLink from top to bottom. Thank you.
And we'll add toilets.
The next question is for Elizabeth Murphy. As housing prices in Dunbar increase and affordability decreases, what will you do to increase the supply of low-cost housing so that young families can live in Dunbar?
Well, that's a big one, and I only have a minute. So, yeah, I mean, housing affordability is a huge issue, and it is something that I think we all have to be concerned about because, you know, we do want the younger generations to be able to live here and all that kind of stuff here. But I think one of the biggest problems that we have right now in Vancouver is land value. And that is really what is driving the costs of housing. And as long as council keeps coming up with these planning programs that dangle up zoning, it keeps the inflationary process of speculation in land value, which makes it worse. So I think what we have to do is get back to neighborhood-based planning processes so that every neighborhood can decide how they want to accommodate all the different forms of housing that they need, and in various different forms, including some that are more affordable. Thank you.
The next question is for Ken Charco. The city planted over 300,000 trees this year, but doesn't have the money to care for the ones we have. The Parks Board has no money to spray with Safer Soap the heritage red oaks along Blenheim Street, and as a consequence they are infested with the red oak skeletonizer. There is evidence to indicate that this is not just an inconvenience for residents. This pest can weaken the trees over time and shorten their lifespan. If elected, will you work to restore the Parks Board budget to allow maintenance of our heritage trees and other green spaces?
Thank you for the question. First and foremost, if elected, one of the major things that we're going to be doing as an MPA is having a clear distinction between council and Parks Board. And Parks Board has to be autonomous in the decisions that they make, and they should not be having any council should not have any influence over what Parks Board what they do. And the only part that council should play in that is to make sure that they have the adequate funding to be able to do the things that they do. And those Parks Board is fundamentally to what everyone needs here. I've been to the community center up here many a time. Susan Anton, she started here dealing with the parks, so we're going to have a really strong commitment to that and to dealing with these issues as an MPA council. Thank you.
The next question is for Councillor Woodsworth. Would you allow low-cost 99-year leases to housing co-ops to develop unused city property?
Well, I think the question is, do we think co-op housing is a good form of housing? And absolutely, it's a great form of housing. And unfortunately, the federal government stepped out of providing funding for co-op housing in about 1993. We have to get the federal government back at the table to work with the city to develop co-op housing. Yes, I'm in favor of us using city land to develop co-op housing, but we need to work with nonprofits to do that. We can look at equity co-ops. and we could look at Street to Home and other organizations to see if they'd like to partner with us. But fundamentally, we're sick and tired of the federal and provincial government downloading onto the cities things that they're supposed to be helping carry. We're the only G8 country in the world without a national housing program, and this is a key component of that. Thanks for the question. Thank you.
We have another question for Adrian Carr. What is your position on exposing children and teachers in schools to Wi-Fi and other wireless microwave radiation communications? Technology now classified by the World Health Organization as a cancer risk, and Health Canada has posted the need for reduced use for children.
That's a tough one, you know, because I use Wi-Fi, and I think most of us probably do in this room. Yet the health studies are increasingly showing that there is risk. And therefore, I think that we should re-examine the policies of moving to Wi-Fi in schools and in community at large. I think our health, we have to be preventative in terms of health impacts. I think there's enough evidence mounting for us to take that study. We have, as a Green Party, opposed the positioning of any Wi-Fi towers on any schools. They have been proposed, not here, but in other municipalities, and we think that's absolutely the wrong way to go. That's okay. I could talk further about other Wi-Fi things, and I'm tempted to go into the smart meters, but I think I'll leave it to conversation afterwards.
Thank you. And a question for Randy Helton. What do you think of the idea of making Vancouver the most accessible city? As we have a larger portion of the population aging and the numbers of people with disabilities will increase, what would you do to focus staff and the community to achieve this goal?
Well, first of all, I strongly support making Vancouver a very accessible city for everyone. And the first most important thing is to make a commitment as a city to do this. And will be translated into efforts right at the street level. For example, there are experts who will walk with you through a community. I've met some of these people. They will walk through a community with expert eyes and look at all of the curbs, all of the steps, and all of the access points, and help us. So I just had very short time to prepare my thoughts on this, but I would for sure like to see a systematic way of going through every single neighborhood in the city with experts, working with community groups, and reviewing the accessibility of the buildings and the streets and sidewalks. And I also, going back to this services review, I believe that there are millions of dollars of savings that could be found if this 1,000 points of improvements was actually released properly to the public for everyone to see how we can save money. And I think we could find money for these kind of expenses. Thank you.
This is the final written question, and it is to all candidates, so we have time for you to all answer if you wish to, or if you wish to pass, that's fine too. I don't know if I dare leave you to jump in, or whether I should start at one end and move down. Maybe I'll start here and move down. The question is as follows. The ward system. Were you for or against implementing the ward system? Why? In other words, would you explain your previous position on the ward question? And if your position has changed since the ward system was first proposed for Vancouver, why has your position changed? Do you want to start us off, Ken?
Absolutely. Good question again. Welcome to the Dunbar debate. Thank you. The ward system is, my thoughts have always been basically the same, and I'll let you know at the end exactly where I stand on that. But we have to respect the process that's been done there. We did have a group of citizens that were picked at large to be able to take a look at our electoral reforms, and they gave suggestions to the government on which way we should be able to do that. Now, having said that, my opinion on what we need to be able to do here is not to completely throw out the at-large system and correct all the shortcomings that has, and completely replace it with a ward system that has not those shortcomings, but a whole bunch of new shortcomings. So what I would suggest, and what I've heard from talking to thousands of people during their electoral process, is to do a hybrid of the two, where we'd have 5 ward systems that would be able to represent the communities, and then 5 at large. So then you'd be able to get the best of both worlds and hopefully cut down on the difficulties of both. Thank you very much.
Elizabeth. And once we finish this question, just so that you know, we will be taking questions from the mic, and you may direct them at one or all candidates after we've been through this board question.
Thank you. Elizabeth Murphy with Neighbourhoods for Sustainable Vancouver. And yes, our position on the wards is that we also support either a ward system or a partial ward, or looking at some other form of neighbourhood representation of some kind. And it has become very evident to me ever since I first got involved with the neighbourhood issues about 4.5 years ago, that one of the biggest problems is that we don't have proper representation at the local level, and everything is far too top down. So we need to reassess how that's done. Thank you.
Do you want every person? Yeah, if you want to, or you can pass if Betty summarized it.
Well, just 15 seconds. Yeah, I think that there should be a good review of the options. There are pros and cons of every form, and the ward system may not be absolutely perfect, but the most important thing is to have a good public discussion so that whatever we choose as a society and a city is something that people really feel comfortable with. So we would be really committed to having a good public discussion on that. Thank you.
Councillor Louis?
So just to disclose, I voted for the ward system. It was during my first term on council that we implemented the referendum on the ward system, and I believe the ward system is superior to the at-large system because it provides accountability for those elected. Each of us that are elected would be accountable, and you know exactly who to go to. Having said that, there is some benefit, I'd say, to an at-large system for the longer-term horizon, larger projects where it requires greater cooperation from all of the council members. But in this day and age of situations where it gets too parochial, and Toronto is an example of where I think it perhaps isn't working as well as it might, a proportional representation model is what I would prefer to have happen here in Vancouver, if we could ever get there. The province hasn't moved in that direction for us, and it's not a system that went through referendum. Is not a true proportional representation system. So until we get there, we live with what we've got, but I'd like it to change and obviously give better representation, direct representation to our neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Some of you may remember that in 2002, following the provincial election of 2001, in which I was the elected Green Party BC leader, first one on the debates, I actually initiated a citizens' initiative under the Recall and Initiative Act for proportional representation in BC. So I did an initiative as a citizen. We gathered 98,000 signatures, 4,000 canvassers throughout the province, and after the end of that, 1 month later, the Citizens' Assembly was established in British Columbia. I'm a great believer in reforming our voting system because too many people right now believe that their vote doesn't count. Well, in fact, it doesn't. Too many people's votes simply don't count towards representation, which, especially amongst youth, leads to a real disenchantment with even voting at all. Consequently, low voter turnout. The ward system does not increase proportionality. It does not increase the chance that your vote will count. There may be some fairness in terms of neighborhood representation, but I would absolutely favor a system at the local level that would include proportionality so that everybody feels that in the end they do get the representation they voted for.
Thank you very much. We did have a referendum on it. Retired Chief Justice Thomas Berger did a very good report. He recommended 14 wards in the city. I think we do need to have a ward system. I've discussed this with many different people. Nobody can figure out what STV stands for, proportional representation, or any of these other things. Everybody understands what a ward system means. A ward system means people can get elected. They don't need the big developers' money to get even visible in the city in an election. It means neighborhoods can elect people from those neighborhoods that are accountable and that represent the work that has been done in the neighborhood. I was just talking to Dr. Singh in the South Asian community. He said year after year after year, South Asian people try to run, try to get elected, and they can't get elected because there's still bias in the city. If there was a ward system, they could be assured they'd have adequate representation. These are just some of the problems that we're seeing that would be addressed under a ward system. We would have a ward system today if Larry Campbell had actually fought for what he said he would fight for, which was a ward system. And we should know what Sam Sullivan spent in fighting to stop the ward referendum from passing, and we still don't know what he spent. So these are some of the questions that we have to still find answers to, but I'm very convinced a ward system with 5 at-large that will represent us at the Metro Board would be a very good way to democratize and engage citizens.
Thank you. And the last phase of this section, so Tim Lewis on the ward system.
I'm very proud of the fact I voted in favor of wards. Prior to that referendum, I voted in favor of the city hiring retired Judge Berger, a very, very wise man who held public hearings throughout the entire city of Vancouver before making his recommendations. You know, we have a ward system federally. We elect our MPs by ridings or wards. We have a ward system provincially, same idea. The reason voter turnout in the city of Vancouver is 31% and dropping is because it must be almost impossible to do due diligence on all the people running in an at-large system. I quite frankly don't know how on earth you do it. Park board, school board, council, there are over 120 people seeking your support. For you to do due diligence on each of them and then remember and pick 10 councillors and 9 school trustees and 7 park commissioners, it would have to give you a headache. So let's have a ward system where you pick 1 park commissioner, 1 school trustee, and 1 city councillor, and if you don't like what they're doing for you, you can get rid of them. If everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. And that's the way it works right now at City Hall. 11 people that all point their fingers at somebody else when you're not happy. This would give you 1 person to point your finger at. So I'm in favor of ward system.
We're now moving to the opportunity to ask questions from the mic, and I would like to let everyone know that I see some other candidates in the room. I think there's Terry Martin standing up there at the mic. I still see Bill McCleary over there, Marie Kircham, I'd like to wave. Eleanor Hadley, I think, is here. Freya Pritt-Paul is here. And so if you have questions for the people on the panel, or even perhaps some of the others, please step forward to the microphone. And Terry's going to start us off.
Yes, I want to ask a question about, it's actually a 2-part question, but it's something that I was very involved in for a very long time. It was very dear to my heart, and my question is to Raymond Louie. In the last election campaign, the entire Vision slate and the mayor said that they were in favor of reinstating third-party appeals in the city of Vancouver to the Board of Variance. Nobody said they would look at it. They said clearly they were in favor. Now, when I asked this question of Jeff Meggs, he said, well, we said we'd look at it, and I decided it wasn't good. But I want the real answer from you. My 2-part question is this. You promised in the last election campaign to reinstate third-party appeals. Your entire party did. When the Board of Variance bylaw came up for discussion, we were told clearly that we would not even be discussing third-party appeals. And then later in the term, I'm told that the Vision majority decided to not reinstate third-party appeals to the Board of Variance. My 2-part question is this. Number 1, why did you represent yourself in that way and then not do what you were said? The second part of my question is, because of your record on that, why should I believe what you tell me now is what you're going to do in the next term. This issue is really important because third-party appeals is a right we had for 50 years in Vancouver and was lost. We were promised it would be returned by your party, and you didn't do it.
Thank you. I think we have the question. Does everyone have a question? Councillor Murray?
Thank you, Terry. That's a very legitimate question in terms of third-party appeals, something that I believe that is still available, but in a very limited fashion. And so the definition of third-party appeals is, that came down from the courts, define the difference between those that are impacted and those that are affected. And so what we went through was a court decision that came down from the judicial system that interpreted where our charter rights lay, and that's what we based our decision on. And after the process, certainly we still believe that those that are directly affected should have that right to go through that process, but this was the process that we went through. The second part of your question is, would you, I'll answer it in the form of a question, would you want your elected officials to look at the best information possible? Or do you want your elected officials to answer every question positively without, and stick to that answer despite new information coming forward? Do you want your elected officials to consider all the best information that they have available after asking staff and our legal system and our legal staff how to proceed, and consider that new information, or stick just with what you said? My preference is that I would like our elected officials to look at the best information, and that's what I did. And I'm sorry for the nuanced difference between what the court says, and certainly but that's not of my making in terms of what the judicial review yielded in terms of its opinion for what the city could and should do as well.
Thank you. The next question is from Terry. I'm afraid, Terry,
I really don't feel my question was answered.
You will have an opportunity to speak with the candidates afterwards, and there's tea and coffee if you'd like to stay and join the conversation.
A quick question for all the candidates. I'm very supportive, and Dunbar is proud of our 16th Avenue and Dunbar project, and we wondered why Southlands, which is our neighbour to the south here, doesn't have an opportunity to have some supportive housing in their district. The Mayor's Endowment Fund actually owns 3 acres in Southlands. It belongs to the City of Vancouver. 3 acres, the value is $10 million. Yes or no, would you have, if you were elected, have this 3 acres put into supportive housing in the community of Southlands?
Would one of the panel like to answer that question? I think it was directed generally.
All right, well, every neighborhood in Vancouver, all 22 neighborhoods, should have supportive housing in their neighborhood. So with regard to the Southlands, yes, Southland should have supportive housing. Now, I don't know the particular lot that you're talking about, so I'm sorry, I cannot give you my word, because whenever I give my word, I keep my word. I cannot give you my word that the particular lot that the city owns in Southlands should be the site. It may not be the best site, I don't know. But I do know this, if Southlands is, as you say, they don't have supportive housing, then there's something wrong. They're not carrying their fair share, and I would make absolutely certain that Southlands and Shaughnessy and Kerrisdale and Kitsilano, where I live, every neighborhood has supportive housing. That's how it works.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Did you want to hear from others?
Maybe 2 more. I'm a little concerned if we run them all the way down. Yes, Adrian wants to respond to that question as well.
Okay, yes, just very quickly. I absolutely agree with Tim, and I stated before, it's about having every neighborhood having not just carrying its fair share, but actually having the opportunity and to have people within the community living close to family and with the history that they've got in that community. The one question I have is, I feel very strongly that land that is agricultural in capacity needs to be preserved. I do not know the zoning of that land, and I would like to look into that because I think we have precious little agricultural land left in the city.
Now Adrian's up. Does any other candidate want to answer that question, or should we move to the next one?
Just really short.
Yeah, we'll move on. And we welcome Bill McCleary, who's had a text change and is now going to sit in for Susan and Tom.
Jane, if I could just take just a second to answer Jerry's question. The simple answer is every neighborhood needs to have social housing in it, supportive housing in it, and we need to spread the burden that of building that into every corner of our city to make sure that we serve the people's needs as best we can.
Thank you. We have 20 minutes for questions from the floor, and I see we have already 7 or 8 people lining up. So when you ask your question, if you could direct it to one or more people so it's clear who the question is directed to, and if you need two to answer, perhaps you could tell them. Thank you.
Okay, so my question then is directed to anybody who can justify the transfer of property taxes from business to residences. I know the NPA and Visions are in favor, and they continue to transfer property taxes at 1% a year. And in fact, I believe the NPA says it to continue ad nauseum. Now my question is then, given the fact that the businesses in Dunbar, including the banks and Starbucks and the other small businesses, are now transferring their property taxes to citizens here, it has two side effects. One, they're allowed to deduct any of their expenses from the taxes they pay. I'm not allowed to deduct my property taxes on my income tax. I bought a house here 25 years ago for $200,000. All right? Now it's assessed at $1.7 million. And I've just got a little lot down here on Highbury and 16th. Now, anybody who builds a house in my block that they get assessed for $2 million, my taxes go up. It's reached the point now that we're retired, we can't afford to pay our property taxes. If it wasn't for the fact that the NDP passed a law that allows seniors to defer their taxes until they die, we wouldn't be allowed to stay in the house. So I want anybody here to justify how they can continue moving property taxes from business to private citizens.
Thank you for that question. Ken is going to lead us off as the NPA was mentioned first.
Thank you very much for the question. I'll explain it in a couple different ways. From a personal point of view, my property taxes for the Dunbar Theatre about 8-9 years ago were roughly around $20,000, and now they're well over $50,000. I've met with representative of the Fair Tax Coalition, which is headed by Leonard Shine, who owns the Fifth Ave, the Park, and the Ridge Theatre. And I took a look at their proposal and the numbers that they crunched, and how they presented it to me and argued for the shiftation basically comes in this way. It's to help you eventually get lower taxes. And why that is, and this is very important, I'm going to try to explain it in a minute, I'll be a little over here, is businesses consume 35 cents of every dollar they give in taxes. Condos consume 1.5 thereabouts worth of services for every dollar they put in. So a plan in the city where we only make condos makes us have to, single-family residents, have to pay more taxes. But if we encourage those small businesses in there to come to the city, like for example, when you had Pixar come to the city, they're giving, let's say, $50,000 worth of taxes, but they're only consuming $20,000. They can land in any municipality they want to be able to do that. And right now, we're paying roughly 7 times the residential property tax, the highest in Canada, for business taxes. Where if you go to Surrey or you just go to Burnaby, you're only paying around 4 times. So we want to encourage those businesses there so that our property taxes will eventually go down. What I would do in making a change is work with the provincial government to allow us to give the legislative ability within City Hall to direct it to those small companies coming in, which we can't do right now. So the ideal situation is to work with the provincial government to make sure we can direct it to small businesses, we can direct it to arts companies, we can direct it to like Fifth Ave or the Park or the Playhouse or the Rio Theatre or the bookstore that we want in here or the individual coffee shop as opposed to the large multinationals. I hope that explained your position there. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was I think Councillor Louis is going to jump in here with perhaps less than lengthy explanation.
You mean I can't go over? Just a little bit?
No, you're a city councilor. You're meant to be good at this.
So the short answer is Vision Vancouver disagrees with the MPA's position. If you want an extra 6% layered onto your residential property taxes, then you vote for the MPA. That's the bottom line. They will continue on with this tax shift. Vision Vancouver will not be continuing on. There is a 0.5% shift that's left in a 5-year plan that was written by Stanley Hamilton. We've completed that once we get that last little bit done, and then we will not continue on. This is a very simple answer to your question. The extra 6% is on top of, we just did an analysis of what the MPA's promises are in terms of extra $400 million worth of capital, another $10 million worth of expenditures. So when they say they're going to keep their taxes to the rate of inflation, the only way that they can do it is by cutting services, and they're not telling us what they're cutting. So the MPA's position is an extra 6% as a result of this tax shift, and we're not going to go there.
Thank you. Representative from Tokyo to jump in on this, or Adrian, do you want to have a jump in this?
Yes, I would actually. You know, I really believe our communities are rooted around the services and the open spaces and the stores that we have there. And it's not the Starbucks, it's those little stores that are diverse, that are independently owned. And I think it's extremely important that we keep them in the city. So, this is not a popular stand, I can tell. And I have been informed by lots of people in small business that they're hurting enough so that they're shutting down. And you've seen the empty stores in your communities. We have to stop that from happening. I think we all want that diversity of stores that give us our neighborhood character. So the tax shift is a little hard to swallow, but I think we've got to continue it. And I've talked to people in the small business community who have said that yes, there is a deduction to their tax, that they can deduct part of it. And by the way, you should be very clear. The banks and these some very small portion of the business owners actually own and occupy their land. Most of the small businesses rent, and they absorb the full cost of an increase to their taxes through triple net rent leases. So they are really taking the brunt of it, and I think we need to be fair about the taxes to keep our small businesses alive.
Thank you. We do have to give Bill McCreary a chance to add to the MPA position, and then Elizabeth.
He already talked.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
We have ours?
I will let Bill speak to join with the MPA position, and then you can respond to that if that's okay.
Thank you. I won't speak, I could, but I'd really like to challenge Councillor Louis' 6%. Where do you get 6% at 1% a year in 3 years?
So Jane, because there's only one of me, can I speak twice?
Yes, you can speak twice. I've got myself in this, haven't I? Yes.
Well, the arithmetic just isn't there. We're going up 1% a year, and the term is 3 years. So where's the 6%, Councillor Louis? Is this another Vision Vancouver fantasy parade or what?
Well, thank you. To-be Councillor McCreary has now taken us to a debate format, and perhaps we will have a final word from Councillor Louis.
Well, it is a good question because Bill perhaps doesn't understand that when in a Vancouver system there's a share model, it's not a ratio model, and when you shift 1% from one side of the equation from business over to residential, it becomes 2%. And that's what's been happening now for the past 5 years. That extra percentage, and in fact in 1 year, the MPA froze business taxes completely. When the tax rate was 4%, it became 8%. And so that's what happens when you shift 1% from one side over to the next. And perhaps Bill McCreary doesn't understand our tax system well enough, but that's how it works, and I'm sure the Speaker understands what has been happening over the past couple of years in terms of residential taxes.
And the last word on this matter is going to NSB, to Elizabeth Murphy.
Thank you. I think that what we have to look at is twofold. One is that housing is extremely expensive in Vancouver, and increasing the tax shift to the residential only makes that worse. But the small businesses are really suffering, and we do have to work with them. So what I think we need to do is to look at the legislation around how tax is calculated, and rather than transferring from the residential to business, that we should be transferring from the larger businesses to the smaller businesses so the mom and pops can get a break. At the same time, we're not increasing the burden on residential. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have a new question at the floor mic.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to ask a question about smart meters in the context of the precautionary principle, the Public Health Act of BC as it applies to municipal governments and their responsibilities to citizens, and in light of the fact that Health Canada now advises reducing our exposure to RMF, EMF from cell phones, especially children, and that more research is needed. And there's an overwhelming amount of people, doctors, medical people, public health professionals around the world, particularly in Europe, who are warning us about the dangers of these kinds of technologies becoming ubiquitous in society. The Freiberger appeal, and I'll just pose my question in the context of a few facts here so that they can be answered. I'd like to maybe test the common sense team tagline with NPA and maybe the idea of vision with Vision Vancouver, because Heather Deal told me last week that there's no evidence. We need to come up with more studies and so on and so on. But there's tons.
I think
of
so.
them.
We need to get to the question.
So the question is, in light of the fact that the Freiberger appeal of over 3,000 German medical doctors has stated that the heightened risk already present with EMFs and microwaves stresses the body's immune system, can bring the body's functioning regulatory mechanisms to a halt. Pregnant women, children and adolescents, elderly and sick people are especially at risk. You can learn about this at citizensforsafetechnology.org, of which I'm a member. But in light of all this fact and the precautionary principle, and in light of the fact that the BC Public Health Act, Bill 23, Section 83.1 states, please listen to this, folks, a municipality must take action when it learns of something that could be harmful to its residents. I would like to know if common sense will be applied, sir. And I'd like to know if do you believe that the smart meter program should be stopped and an independent inquiry launched with full public hearings. If you don't believe that, please tell me why in the context of these facts.
Thank you. I believe this program was, this question in essence has already been answered by Ken Chalco, so Bill McCleary will take
It wasn't answered. He talked about water meters, so I'd like a real answer, please.
I'm sorry, this is not a debate, this is a question. I'm moderating it. I'm giving the question to Bill McCleary.
Okay, the question you're talking about is the cell phones and that kind of
smart meter.
Smart meter. Okay, well that's as already been said. That's a BC Hydro jurisdiction. I would certainly, as a councillor, when elected, I will actively engage BC Hydro and the provincial government to make sure that this thing is reviewed. I have anecdotal evidence with regard to cell phones, for instance, from the son of a very good friend of mine who died from a brain tumor because he was a fisherman. He spent a lot of time like this in his fish boat with a cell phone. I've also had two other people that I know of that have had brain tumors from, and the suspicion is it was cell phones. So that's anecdotal, I think, but it's certainly, to me, it's something that I think we must take seriously. And the city must do what it can do to make sure that this is looked into. Thank you.
Councillor Louis, you were also asked for a vision response.
Yes. So, can't speak to what Councillor Deal might have said to you. But what I can say is that I personally went out to BC Hydro and did a bit of investigation myself to understand the system that they're using and how much transmission actually occurs. The information that I received back was that they create a network at a local level. That local network, they transmit once an hour and for 1 second, apparently, to a collection center. And then that collection center then transmits once a day for 1 second to the central bank where they collect that information. So when you when you think about the total amount of transmission in comparison to perhaps anyone here answering their cell phone, it's relatively small, or very, very small. Having said that, this is the information that I received, and I'm happy to go and talk with you further, because I was very much concerned as you are. You know, the precautionary principle is something that we should all take very seriously especially with our children and schools and such. So that's why I went out there to ask this information. Happy to talk with you further and get more information on how their information is flawed and go back and forth and advocate for the precautionary principle. And that's what I can promise that I will do on an ongoing way, because I, like you, want to make sure our city is safe for our citizens overall, especially our children.
Thank you, Councillor Louis. Elizabeth Murphy would like to respond to.
Thank you. And yeah, regarding the smart meters, I think it's one of these issues that again, individuals should be able to choose. If they don't want to have one of these meters on their home, at least they should have the right to refuse. And I don't believe that they are allowing that. So there certainly needs to be a much bigger discussion, because it's not only an issue of health risks, which it could be significant, but it's also an issue of security too, because basically all of that data of exactly how much you use, when you're awake, what you do is downloaded and transmitted. And some people have raised concerns about that as well. And I think that really all of these issues should be looked at from a public perspective before BC Hydro just decides to do this to us. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 5 more minutes for questions, so I'm going to ask the questions to stop with the gentleman at the back of the wheelchair, so we'll take no more questions, but we'll run through the 4 people standing there, if that's acceptable to everybody. Because the coffee is made, the tea is ready, and the cookies are sitting there. Okay, we have your question, please.
I'll just do a one-liner then. I want to know what, if anything, does anyone plan to do about smoke-free housing? We're talking about Wi-Fi, we're talking about all these. I mean, this is an established health risk, and it is virtually impossible. It is so incredibly difficult to find smoke-free, accessible housing. I have asthma. I've been forced to move 6 times. I'm not a pedophile. I shouldn't have to move because I have a disability, because I simply do not have any rights. Theoretically, I'm protected in parks from secondhand smoke, but not in my own home. What, if anything, will anybody do about creating affordable housing for people with respiratory disabilities, or people who wish to avoid developing them in the first place?
Thank you. Who would like to jump into that one? Okay, Ken's going to jump, and then the rest. Councillor Louis.
First off, thank you so much about bringing your personal situation forward here. I know it's probably difficulty. This is part of the great process that we're going through. I thought about a number of things over the last 6 months, and this is the first time this has come up. So I'm going to tell you right from the heart, right from where I'm standing. I'm a non-smoker. For all you smokers out there, I'm supportive in all the quit smoking things that are out there. This is another one that I'd fully support. I see no reason why in the city working with the province couldn't be able to provide that. I can tell you I'm a strata president as well, and I move strongly to make sure that you can't even smoke on your own patios, because I think that that's an inappropriate activity. So my answer to you is that yes, I will be an advocate for you and your disability and others like you for that, because you bring up a very good point. And again, thank you so much for bringing your personal issues here forward today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Louis.
So thank you for the question. I'm also a director at Metro Vancouver's Housing Committee as well, and we're dealing with that very same issue as we redevelop and look for opportunities to improve the situation in all of our buildings. That is something that I'm very interested in. In fact, I've been corresponding with Dr. Stuart Kreisman, who's
I know him, yeah.
And he's just sent me some more material that I've been reviewing to try to find a way, like in where was it, in Santa Monica, or Sonoma, in county in California, in the city of Santa Rosa, they introduced a bylaw that gave them that opportunity. It's different here, I expect, because that was the United States and this is Canada, but we should be looking at it as much as possible. I know I was just out for dinner with my family the other day and a restaurant, and because we now have a blanket ban on smoking within restaurants, the experience for all of us, I think, is much improved. And when you do smell, because the door was opened and smoke came in, we all noticed. And so I very much empathize with what you're saying, and we'll be working very hard to try to make that happen.
Thank you. We have a comment.
Just add a couple more. I think this is a critical issue. My partner's a severe asthmatic, and it is a really serious question. When we were building co-op housing, when the federal government was building co-op housing, they were building in allergy-free suites. Now that they're not funding the co-ops, and some of the co-ops are going under, we're losing those suites. And sometimes those suites are being lost to people who don't have allergies. So we need to be working with the federal level of government as well as the provincial level of government on this one, and thank you for bringing it to our attention.
And a final comment from NSB.
Actually, if you look at most rental housing, like private rental housing, most of the time they advertise for non-smokers. So it's very common in private housing. So certainly with subsidized housing, why couldn't that be a standard rule? I don't understand why that would be.
Well, in subsidized housing, I understand most of that they do allow smoking, which
yeah, but that's what I'm saying is that in most of private, many of them require non-smokers. So if they can do that with private, they certainly can do it with public.
They don't. That's the point.
Yeah.
No, 6 of the.
But they should.
I know they should. But what I'm saying is, what are you guys going to do to make sure that that does happen? Because out of the 6 places that I've been forced to move out of because of smokers, 5 of them had no smoking in my lease, which is why I signed in.
And
I had to move.
allowed.
The smokers didn't. I had to move.
Oh.
Thank you for the question. We need to move on, I'm afraid, because we are out of time. So if we could ask the remaining question is to direct their question to one candidate. It will.
Oh, what a shame. Because my question is short, and I was going to say that if the answers are short, we should be able to hear a response from one rep of each of the parties. But
if the answer
you're
is
the
short,
moderator.
If the answer is short, we can do that. Would you agree to a short answer, panel? Yes, they agree to a short answer.
It concerns rental housing, and we hear terms bandied about loosely: affordable, subsidized, whatever. So I'll stick to only one. In a figure, relative to income, what is your definition of affordable? Short answer.
One number each, please.
I would go by the definition provided by the Downtown Neighborhood Council, which is 1/3 of your income if you're on income assistance or if you're on pensions. That's what real affordability is.
Thank you.
Adrian?
Yes, it's 30% by most all studies that and institutes involved with
You're talking gross or net?
Gross.
Thank you.
Councillor Louis?
Next.
30% gross.
Thank you.
NSB?
The standard is 30%.
Thank you.
And the NPA?
30%.
Thank you.
30%.
Do we have an agreement between all candidates?
I'd just like to say it's very different. That if somebody wants to move in, they have an income of $2,000. If someone's on income assistance, they've only got $375 in income assistance for rent. It's very different. So a developer can build something and he says, I'm going to build 20% affordability. It is not affordable for a pensioner or someone on income assistance.
That's right.
And veterans are another group that are really being caught in this.
Thank you. Now we have another question at the mic, and then one, and we are going to...
My question is really about capital priorities. Early in the meeting, there was reference to doing more to improve rec centers and recreation facilities and keep taxes down at the same time. And I also am a supporter of urban greenways and bikeways, but I live across from the intersection of 22nd and Quinella Balaclava, and I watch what, to me and my neighbors, is an insane amount of money being spent to put a peninsula where there was once a little island, instead of just a bit of signage and landscaping. So perhaps $100,000, I don't think that's an excess estimate, and maybe under the cost of the months of work that went in to change that one intersection. I would argue leave a few of them much more simple, because they've worked for 80 or 100 years, and put the money in the rec center. wonder, therefore my question really is, have you or will you, Vision, really look thoroughly, not just at the greenways, but what are the priorities at the level of capital investment in the specific detail that the engineering department is spending? Because it is bloody awful in my view, and at least a few neighbors. I don't know what others feel.
Thank you. I think the question is directed to you, Councillor Mayor.
So the short answer is yes. We intend to go through every nook and cranny of the city operation. The first motion I moved at the beginning of this term was the Vancouver Services Review, and as part of that, we engaged all of our staff. We looked at getting information from every department, senior staff down to the workers, and we also solicited input from our citizens as well on where we might be able to find savings. We've been working through about 2,000 suggestions, and we've implemented a number of them already to save tens of millions of dollars as part of the Vancouver Services Review. A simple example is where garbage collection in our parks was a separate collection system than our city municipal residential collection at the same time. It's now consolidated to one. 7 IT departments down to one. Purchasing points within our city was 30 some odd, and now it's been reduced, I think, down to 7. So these are ongoing issues that we've been dealing with, and down to that micro scale, yes, that's the intention, but we're trying to tackle the big ones first, and so far we've saved tens of millions of dollars for the taxpayers, and that's how we'd be able to keep taxes in 2011 at 1.88%, which was below the rate of inflation.
Thank you. And our last question is to the gentleman who you may have stepped over coming into the room, because we apologise once again for not having a sign showing where handicapped access was. And one question, please, because we're down to like 2 cookies apiece at the moment.
I'm just going to add to the Wi-Fi debate. I'm a systems analyst and biochemist, so I understand the biology and the computer side of it. I'd like to address Wi-Fi overlap. Even if some signals are very weak and some of them are barely significant on the biology side, but if you turn on your Wi-Fi, your phone, suddenly sometimes you see 50 or 100 signals on that list. So how do they add up? So the question is Wi-Fi overlap. And that we have a question of how do we test for it because it's invisible. What's the intensity of it in any given place that we might be eating, drinking coffee, reading something. And then there's regulation. How do you regulate overlapping Wi-Fi signals that people don't know of each other? Back to schools. In schools, we can do point-to-point and avoid Wi-Fi. It's a reverse technology where you don't actually continuously send or listen. You just send out to a monitor that says, you're here, and then you start doing point-to-point signals, which can be way less effect on the body.
Excuse me, sir, do we have a question? Do we have a question?
I open it to you now.
Okay. So I think the question is,
so there's Wi-Fi overlap and point-to-point technology for schools.
Would you consider implementing an investigation into Wi-Fi overlap and point-to-point technology?
I'm glad I came here tonight. I'm getting an engineering degree, I think. Certainly, what you've described makes more sense than creating an overlap, especially in our schools, to have multiple signals like that.
Those are 2 different issues.
So,
I'm discussing the Wi-Fi overlap generally, no matter where you go. And in the schools, the Wi-Fi signals can be removed to a high degree and replaced with point-to-point signals, but not with the same technology.
I'll make the school suggestion to the school board trustees and ensure that they get that message. For the wider public overlap, I'm at a loss. I don't know what to do about it at this point in time, other than to do a little more research, and maybe there's ways that we can
spot checking,
ensure that there's less. There's perhaps some ways that we can shield or limit the amount of usage within certain areas.
Thank you. We've run out of time and we've run over, and I'd like to thank all the candidates for coming tonight. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Wonderful questions, and just remember to get out and vote, and we want to keep alive the urban myth that to win on council you've got to win in Dunbar. So take 10 people to the polls, and please join us for coffee and cookies. Thank you.